I learned something about this figure this week, and it's all because of comics. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Weekly Stack, and I'm Derek McCaw, and here are the rules, if you want to call them rules. I'm a nerd who goes every week to House of Secrets in Burbank, California, picks up my comic stack. Sometimes it's pre-ordered, obviously through whatever distribution channel, because there's like 5 now. I can't keep count. Apparently, it changes from week to week, and sometimes then I go through and look on the racks, shelves, and see what else is interesting to me. And so a miracle has happened. Normally, I talk about the books that I get to read just before I record one of these, and usually it's not every book in the bag because I have fallen behind and I go through. This week, I actually managed to read every single one because I had spent last weekend catching up on some runs, and it all paid off. So let's get to where I want to go. So I'm going to start off with the big oversized book, which is Batman Second Night it's The Batman Second Night by the, I think, underrated Dan Jurgens. And I say underrated because he kind of gets forgotten when people talk about stuff. But he was one of the masterminds behind The Death of Superman, which in and of itself, in hindsight, but some really very powerful Superman stuff going forward after that. So, and he created or co-created Booster Gold, and for that, he has a special place in the firmament of comics creators. So Dan Jurgens is the writer, art and cover by Mike Perkins, and colors by Mike Spicer, letters by Simon Boland. And I freaking love this. There was a first night on Black Label, and then the second night, and which introduces Superman. These are set in 1940, and so it's not actually what they are going to say in the new history of DC Universe. They're not going to say this is continuity. This is going back to where Batman and Superman were in 1940, and with, again, more modern, potentially more realistic look at the forces that in World War II or pre-World War II, they would have never, ever actually acknowledged. One of the villains in this is the Scarecrow. I'm not sure truly how accurate, but it's very much more of an explanation for Jonathan Crane that comes out of World War I. So I love that. I love a Superman who things are an effort and the world is very confused by him. I love the resurgence of Julie Madison, the Hollywood starlet that was briefly Bruce Wayne's girlfriend in the early 40s. And what happens with her is something that, no way they're making this continuity, but I can hardly wait for what I assume will be Third Night. It's a 3-issue miniseries. There's going to be an oversized paperback collecting all 3 soon, and I look forward to that. So, there we go. Next up, Justice League versus Godzilla versus Kong 2. This is just fun. This is by Brian Buccellato, and let me get to everybody involved here. Brian Buccellato is the writer, Christian Duce is the artist, and Luis Guerrero is the colorist, with Comicraft's Tyler Smith as letterer. Look, I've said before, I can't get past, Godzilla Minus One is like my favorite Godzilla movie. The Legendary movies, which this is, off of the American Legendary films. And I'm glad I'm recording this right after Monarch, Legacy of Monsters, just came back on Apple TV. These are fun. And there are things I could say about Monarch that are different, going deeper, but this is even though this is the second miniseries, meeting this alternate universe Justice League, going into another world and meeting Godzilla versus Kong and all the monsters and the Titans, as you will. It actually, the Justice League has already had this encounter, and then they have been pulled back before Godzilla and Kong have actually met them in the first miniseries. So look, it's goofy from there, but fun, and I'm really enjoying Harley Quinn in it. Really enjoyed, I should say, because this is the last issue of that, and dug it. All right. New History of the DC Universe, The Dakota Incident, which is by a variety of creators. Let me get to it. Let me find that page. You know, you'd think I would know if I were to actually prep this, I would probably wreck the books. And I'm not too careful with my comics. I read them and then I put them in a box. I don't even bag them. I don't even board them unless it's something that I know will be like, yeah, I might want to get that signed later or something like that, So, anyway, The New History of the DC Universe, The Dakota Incident, Act 1 by Joseph P. Illich. The writer, Valentine DeLandro, is the artist. Marissa Louise is the colorist. Act 2 is by Stephanie Williams, a writer who I'm really loving her work. Carlo Pagulian and Steven Segovia are the pencils. Jason Paz is the inks. John Kalis is the colorist. Act 3 is Morgan Hampton is the writer. Fico Oshio is the artist. Ulysses Areola is the colorist. And there's a prelude and epilogue. Yes, there are. Setting up Static's return. Nicholas Draper Ivy is the writer. Edwin Galmon is the artist. Andrew Dahlhaus is the colorist. And overall, and World Design is the letterer. There is story consultation from Mark Waid, because we are talking about what is the established continuity now of the DC Universe, assuming the DC KO doesn't blow it all up and gives an excuse to change things. This is probably a controversial book. Now, I'm recording this in March, and obviously this got the banner that says this is celebrating Black History Month. They waited to the last week of Black History Month to explain why most of their black heroes from Milestone Media, which technically, legally, I don't have time here to understand the relationship between Milestone Media and DC. Just know that if you are not familiar with them, you are familiar with Static because of the animated series Static Shock. And there is currently a Batman Beyond Static crossover miniseries happening. I'm not sure how this connects, but it is revisiting a dark time in continuity that I did not know they were keeping, which is that at one point Lex Luthor was president, and in 2026, I guess that makes sense to remind people that they called that. Yay. So an explanation why the Milestone heroes of Dakota City have not really been active in most of books, not just because DC wasn't quite sure what they wanted to do, and what they should have done was just let the marketplace decide and put some damn good creators on these damn good characters and see what happens. Now, they have tried, and they started over from square one, and I can't remember what they called those books, and I read the Static one, and I honestly didn't like the updated backstory too much, so I didn't really get into Hardware, and Icon was a shame because I love Icon and Rocket. I love Static. And Hardware a little iffier, but this makes it make more sense. There's also an alternate future happening here, and so I think as a concept, this book is maybe a little more confusing than it needed to be, but it's still a worthwhile read. Using that administration from the past that was, of course, completely fictional because it's Lex Luthor and he's not real, right? Because he's actually a lot smarter than any of the damn billionaires that are running things right now. It's a good analogy, I guess, and to call things out. Because obviously it took months to put this together because comics are always a few months ahead of time. But it hit very hard this weekend when I read it, and so it's worth taking a look. Unless you think that, my God, who is this stinking leftist liberal who thinks that comics cover politics? They do. Get over it. Okay? They just don't necessarily call everything exactly what it is because you got to still have room to be somewhat entertaining. Anyway, such as this, The Rocketeer, The Island, with one of my favorite people, John Layman, a writer friend I've known for many, many years, and I'm not saying that to brag. I just, got a name drop because I can acknowledge maybe I'm a little bit biased by knowing these people. So the writer-letterer is John Layman, the artist is Jacob Edgar, and the colorist is KJ Diaz, and this is actually based on a story by Dave Stevens, so I don't know quite the origins here. This is The Rocketeer going in search of Amelia Earhart, which my friend Dave Avalone did a Doc Savage miniseries called Ring of Fire, if you can find that from Dynamite, that also covered that let's go find Amelia Earhart. It makes sense since the Rocketeer technically in his original stories did meet Doc Savage. That's who invented the rocket pack, though for various trademark reasons could not identify that that man of bronze who was wearing a helmet was Doc Savage, even though his assistants were very clearly looked an awful lot like Monk and Ham. And if you're lost, well, I'll catch up with Doc Savage, not with you some other time. Anyway, so the Rocketeer, very fun. I always have mixed emotions about the Rocketeer because I think continuations anyway is because I think that one of the reasons that I like the character so much is that sadly there really isn't that much material by his original creator Dave Stevens, who unfortunately passed away several years ago. But everybody who loves pulp, who loves that 1991 Disney movie, loves the Rocketeer. And I think it's always hard too because Dave Stevens' artwork was so beautiful. This Jacob Edgar is a little more cartoony, and I think it's the right choice. It took me a while to get there. I think it's the right choice because it also kind of brings in, there's a whole new generation of fans who know the Rocketeer from the Disney Junior animated series. And I'm not saying this is childlike stuff. This is, I can definitely sense there's the ghost of Dave Stevens' fingerprints over the storytelling. Lehman is, of course, a great storyteller and knows his stuff there. But by being a little more cartoony than the very gorgeous, I guess, good girl art, if you want to say, I don't know, what would you say? It was just lush, what Dave Stevens was doing, that this kind of melds two generations of fandom into this book. So I like it. It's the first issue, so boom, there's ads for all the ways you could catch up, and if you're not a fan of the Rocketeer, you should be. Okay? Yeah, no question. All right. Alice Forever After #2 from Boom Studios. I talked about the first issue. Dan Panosian, Giorgio Spalletta. Dan wrote it. Giorgio Spalletta and Dan split the art chores in that in the real world, if you will, it's Panosian's art. In Wonderland, it's Spalletta's. Francesco Segala is, I believe, the colorist, and letterer is Jeff Eckelberry. And I am sorry, I think Boom's done a great job by having the colorist in there, but I also think they should include the letterers on the cover. Everybody should, because look, it is part of the storytelling, and I admit I didn't always appreciate that as well as I should have, but now I am old and understand where all my failures have been in the past. So, this is fun, giving a weird, he's not the first person, Dan Panosian, to take a beloved children's classic that involved the real world and fantasy worlds and say that there's something about the treatment of mental illness involved. And again, I like this one. This has been a trilogy: Alice, Ever After, Never After, and now Forever After. And this is with her child as well, which also not the first time that somebody's done that with a beloved children's character. But I love the way Panosian has taken this. My only disappointment, if I must say, is that Panosian's not drawing the whole book. But, I also get that because he's really taken off as a writer. And this takes a lot of time to put these books together. So I get it. My disappointment is just a personal, I'm a whiner. Okay. Absolute Martian Manhunter #9. Now, this is going to end with #12. Some people were sad, but I also appreciate that Dennis Camp, who is the writer, planned that kind of all along. Javier Rodriguez is the artist. It's been cool. The letterer is Hassan Otsmani Elhau, who I have talked about before. It was all over the place, and I'm sure it's not the last time I will say his name today. Also, I love that they acknowledge the Martian Manhunter was created by Joseph Samakson and Joe Certa. If you have never read that first story where Professor Erdl's experiment, I'm not sure that they intended back in the 50s that the Martian Manhunter would really appear much more than he did. And he did. He became a founding member of the Justice League. People like to forget that. But anyway, I love this take in the Absolute Universe being something completely different from who the Martian Manhunter is in the All-In universe, if we're going to call it that. So, love this. I've talked about this before. The trade paperback of the first 6 issues is available. If you cannot find 7, 8, 9 in the stores, then you've got to wait a few months and issue a graphic novel, whatever you want to say. Trade paperback volume 2 is going to happen, and that's where the Martian Manhunter ends in the Absolute Universe. That doesn't mean he ends there, it just means that's where it ends here. It's such a wacko idea. There's an absolute version of Despero in here, and that's a really cool take too. Now, so Dennis Camp, I love your work. I caught up on I think almost all the Absolutes. Absolute Wonder Woman number 17, which is by Kelly Thompson. Let me make sure I said that correctly. I believe it's by Kelly Thompson. And yes, Kelly Thompson's the writer, Hayden Sherman is the artist, and Jordi Belair, gorgeous colorist, is the colorist, and Becca Carey is the letterer. And this is Season of the Witch Part 2 of 5. This introduces Absolute versions as an arc of several characters. I think we've seen Dr. Poison before. Giganta is here, Cheetah, but most importantly, and I think I mentioned in the last issue, Zatanna. So the Absolute Zatanna has been introduced, and it's also a very interesting take, and I kind of forget as I go month to month with Absolute Wonder Woman. She is a lot more magic-based than Diana in the All-In universe. So once again, cool book. I'm not going to rave too much because you know I have Sorcerer Supreme. This is by number 3 by Steve Orlando. Bernard Chang is the artist. Color artist is Ruth Redman, and the letterer is VC's Joe Sabino. This is the next volume in The Scarlet Witch, and I really like what Steve Orlando's been doing from the get-go of Scarlet Witch, where for the most part you really don't need to know what's else has been going on in the Marvel Universe. Though this, I guess, probably, there's a very good reason it's called Sorcerer Supreme and not Wanda Maximoff Sorcerer Supreme, or however you want to say it, because it really is about who's going to be. It's a war for who's going to be the Sorcerer Supreme. There we go. Love that book. I think it's really worth following through on all these. I totally get, though, this is the Marvel marketing where it can be a little hard to get. There's the Scarlet Witch. There's a Vision in the Scarlet Witch. I think there was another miniseries that renamed the series a bit too, and now this Sorcerer Supreme. And I also want to say it's probably going to show up in stores soon. There's a Marvel Tales, Tails, that involves Wanda and in her store in Lockkill, and that many different comic book pets, if you will, superpowered pets, come through the door, where if you need help, the last resort basically goes through. So it's been on their on their app, and it's one of those scrolling exclusive, digital exclusive books. So I think that it's going to probably show up in print, because there are still people that are reading in print. Hey, I obviously am. I subscribe to the app because they have been moving some material over there. It does show up eventually, but I like to just kind of scroll in the middle of the night. That, Global Comics, and DC Infinite have all been, well worth the investment for me. Mostly for catching up on old stuff, honestly. But Marvel and DC both sometimes new stuff, like I couldn't find it at the shop or whatever. And Global Comics, because I couldn't find it at the shop. There's a lot of indie stuff on Global, so here at that one. All right, Hyde Street from Ghost Machine and Image Comics, which I talked about last week on in an article, because they're doing a big crossover event, but not for the characters that I thought they were going to. Yeah, they are doing crossover for the characters I thought too, but anyway. I was raving about this to a friend last week as well. Did coffee with a friend last Friday, and just noticing this time, because I've opened this book several times, that even the lettering, so I'm going to start with Rob Lee, who in the credits box has made it look like an EC comic. I really appreciate that. That somehow there's this cool, with Hyde Street, the thing I somehow love seeing is both an overarching story and one-off horror stories coexisting perfectly, and they all move the plot along, and there's been a spin-off miniseries. Dig it. Creators are Jeff Johns and Ivan Rice. The writer is Jeff Johns. The artist is Francis Portela. Color artist is Brad Anderson. And I mentioned the aforementioned Rob Lee on lettering. It focuses on a character named Sisterhood, or Sisterhood, and I love Hyde Street. It surprised me. I don't know why I got surprised, but I got surprised. So there we go. I'm digging it. DCKO tie-in. Yeah, there was one. Justice League Unlimited, Part 5 of the Terrific 10. This is Mark Waid. Dan Mora is the artist. Tamara Bonvillain is the colorist. And Ariana Marr is the letterer. As I said, this is a book that I enjoy because, of course, Mark Waid, who used to be like the unchallenged, only Tom Galloway could best him at maybe at the Profan Trivia match that I was lucky enough to occasionally get asked to host. And this brings in so many characters, particularly focusing on Airwave, who I really... I don't know why I love Airwave so much. I just remember back up in one of an 80s comic where he was reintroduced, and he has the same name as Hal Jordan. He's Hal Jordan, but he's like a younger cousin by a couple of decades. And I do remember Airwave did exist like in the 40s, and he got swept up in Jeff Johns' Forgotten Children, and now Lost Children. I'm forgetting what that miniseries was called. It was like 10 issues. Stargirl rescued these time-lost characters that were both sidekicks, and then in the case of Airwave, just Airwave. Kid Hero, who never really has gotten his due, but I think in the right hands, and Mark Waid's probably the right hands, Airwave could turn out to be a pretty cool character, and he's been used as sort of like, well, he's out of time, so he was abused by Gorilla Grodd, and felt made to betray the Justice League without understanding that he was doing that, and now this is his redemption. At the same time, as you can tell, I'm always plagued by indigestion. Why? Because I'm old. All right, anyway, this is his redemption arc at the same time as Mr. Terrific has returned from hell and lost the Terrific 10, or 9 of the Terrific 10, because I think he counts as that. And you've seen all these alternate versions of heroes from the future, from the past, etc. I have enjoyed that. And so I love this book. It's just very fun. Now I'm going to go for a book that I did really, really love, and I should have expected it. I did expect it, because this is The Peril of the Brutal Dark, an Ezra Kane mystery. This is part of the big relaunch of Vertigo. This is by Chris Condon and Jacob Phillips, who together did one of my favorite books of the last 5 years. 3 miniseries called That Texas Blood. I think there was a Christmas special as well. And then there's a prequel, The Enfield Gang Massacre. And all of it was great. And so I kind of knew. Chris Condon's been over writing Ultimate Wolverine, and I've enjoyed that. I'm not as big a Wolverine head as everybody else seems to be in my world, but that's okay. And you know what? In a dark confession, I don't much like Venom either. As a villain, I do. I just don't know that he needs to be in every damn book. But anyway, this is a noir with a supernatural touch, a little bit of The Mummy thrown in, and or it's sort of, but it's actually a Grecian exhibit. And this is a hard case detective, former cop, getting called in the 40s to solve the disappearance of some characters. The letterer, by the way, Hassan Otsmane Elhau. I hope I'm pronouncing that right, and if I'm not, please correct me politely. Never heard him out loud, his name said out loud, and haven't met him yet. And I don't know if letterers get acknowledged at conventions as often as they should. I don't know. Other than Richard Starkings, because Richard Starkings does his own books and runs Comicraft. So anyway, I love this. By subtitling it An Ezra Kane Mystery, there's the implication they're going to do exactly what they were doing with That Texas Blood, which is a series of mysteries, and I'm going to dig that. Vertigo, often a line that was, in its previous existence, a little hard to pin down as to what you'd get with a Vertigo book, but definitely set the tone for what has happened with a lot of other companies. And so I'm really pleased to see that DC has set that imprint up again. And yeah, so I'm all in on this. And Chris Condon, who I believe, and please if I'm wrong, yeah, write in and tell me, boy, you wish. I believe he wrote the foreword to the Horror Not Hate anthology, which still you can still order. We have fully funded, but you can still order it on Kickstarter. And yeah, when J.M. Brandt told me that Chris Condon deigned to be part of this, I was blown away, as I am. Again, with all the talent I've seen in that book, you're gonna like it. So I'm gonna quickly jump ahead a couple. I can go through quickly on the Marvel side, the mortal Thor. I was also talking about this to somebody else. I really like what Al Ewing, and I believe this is Pasquale Ferry, is the artist. And yeah, Pasquale Ferry, Matt Milla is the color artist, and BC's Joe Sabino is the letterer. I won't go too deep. Again, do I think you need to have read the previous two Thor series that Al Ewing wrote? I'm honestly not sure. And by the way, yes, Alex Ross cover. Can't go wrong with an Alex Ross cover. I dig this. A Thor who does not know the Earth is now in a timeline where it has been disconnected from the Norse gods, from Asgard. And Beta Ray Bill, kind of an echo of Asgard, was a founding member of the Avengers instead of Thor, and now the person who is clearly Thor is working his way through Earth in New York City, where there are forces marshaled against him who also may not know that he's Thor, but know that he's trouble. So it's a really cool take, and they have occasionally visited back to Asgard so far. This is number 7, dug it. And the Ultimates, number 21, we're getting very close to the end of the Ultimate Universe. This is by Dennis Camp, who is becoming one of my top writers. My favorite? How do you want me to say it? I'll say it. Dennis Camp, Per Perez is the artist. Color artist is Federico Blee. The letter is VC's Travis Lanham. And Daikaran and Nira J. Manon are the cover artists. And yeah, this book is fun. I'm not digging the Ultimates now as we're running to the end as much as I want to, because I think with so many characters, the monthly jump forward is a little hard for me to keep track of who I was reading and where, because some of them have shown up in other books. This introduces the Ultimate Defenders, who are not good guys, but it is an issue that definitely speaks to, in a world where we are concerned about, is what we're seeing really what we're seeing? And it's still just wild to me that that's something we can say, but it's true. We don't know. So not 100%. So, it's tackling that, and I like that. So I'm going to go now with, this is what I started with, right? Phantom of the Opera, Universal Monsters, Phantom of the Opera, number 1, from Skybound and Image, written by Tyler Boss, and art by Martin Simmons, and Becca Carey is the letterer. So this sent me into a rabbit hole of Phantom of the Opera. Okay? One, I'm not sure, unlike the other books that have done this Universal Monsters, which I've enjoyed all of them. Again, don't get me wrong. They're kind of like retellings of, I could tell you exactly which version of the Universal Monsters they're tackling. This seemed to be borrowing more from the Claude Rains 1943 version than the Lon Chaney 1925 version. And so this was the rabbit hole. Realized I couldn't say for sure because I had never seen the Claude Rains version, but I had it because I had that big Universal Monsters box set, which I think they just released it again on 4K. I've had it in DVD, I had it in Blu-ray, but I'd never watched the Phantom of the Opera, again, the Claude Rains version, because the 1925 Lon Chaney version is in the public domain, so I think Kino Lorber is the one that put together the Blu-ray that I currently have, and that movie really works. I love that movie. It ended up not being so hot on the 1943, but because I'm me and my wife had to pack for a business trip, I watched the behind-the-scenes documentary or the commentary, whatever you want to say, and so learned some things here. Phantom of the Opera, to me, has been a character that loomed large in my childhood, not because, look, I'm way too old for the Andrew Lloyd Webber musical to have been like my gateway into the Phantom. But when that came out, I read the Gaston Leroux novel, but I think it was the first Aurora model kit that my parents gave me. I was maybe 7, with the glow-in-the-dark parts, so 71 or 72. And then I've recently discovered that, of course, I showed this up top, these Marx figures of that are in the mid-60s. This figure is not actually based on Lon Chaney or Claude Rains. This is based on James Cagney playing Lon Chaney, playing the Phantom of the Opera in a movie called Man of a Thousand Faces, which I've never seen, and now I have to go and look for that one too. But I know it's heavily fictionalized, and there's also a great graphic novel biography of Lon Chaney called Lon Chaney Speaks that I recommend, and I'll put a link in the Fanboy Planet page for this. If it's still available, I don't know, but I picked it up at a bookstore, I think at Vroman's, and was like, yeah, this is the stuff. Anyway, I'm going on way too long. I should probably make this its own review. I did like the comic. If it is riffing off of the 1943 version, it's doing the thing that the 1943 version should have done but didn't, and I understand it was World War II, and Universal is, negotiating a lot of things with censors and so forth. The 1943 version is a little more comedic. It focuses a lot more on the opera and not as much on the Phantom. It takes a very long time to get to the Phantom. But not for Eric, who's a violinist, and he's shown at the very beginning. But there's all kinds of things that are messed up in that film. This immediately starts with a killing, and yay. Starts with the Phantom, alludes to the different things, which I'll give the Andrew Lloyd Webber version also credit for acknowledging that, as any good Phantom should be, no one's really quite sure what they've seen, so descriptions are always different. And the opera ghost, as they call him, both the novel and in the movies. So we came for the monster. So I know there's still other versions I need to watch. There's a 1962 Hammer horror version with Herbert Lom as the Phantom. I believe Robert Englund played him in one adaptation years later, which I've heard weighs more heavily on the gore. I'm okay with that, because if you go back to the Gaston Leroux novel, maybe this should just be its own video. You go back to that novel, Eric is a monster, and the 1943 version, I think has opened the door for the pity the Phantom, if you will. Oh, he's misunderstood. He's gone through some terrible things. Whereas at least Lon Chaney said, no, he's a monster. It's not quite the same storyline as the novel, but I think that's the truest I've seen so far. That's enough. I can go further. Oh, the other thing I did want to say, because it's also came up with my Werewolf Frankenstein interview with Chris Robinson last week, that in The Bride of Werewolf Frankenstein, he includes the Phantom of the Paradise's mask. Watching the 1943 version, I will say this, definitely Brian De Palma pulled more from the 1943 version than I knew. And so that is the beginning of where people see him, the Phantom, as this romantic figure, and yet of the classic Universal Pictures, you can see the soul of most of the monsters. Not Dracula. Dracula is a monster. Wolfman, Lon Chaney Jr. did not want to be what he is. The Frankenstein monster is under often, Dracula's thrall at a certain point, but there's still a sorrow. And you can see that with even the creature from the Black Lagoon. But the Phantom is a monster. And so, it is, again, later you get to Phantom of the Paradise, which you haven't seen Phantom of the Paradise, do yourself a favor and stick with it, because I think the opening of it plays a little weirdly by our standards, or by our modern standards. Not for me, but it does. I get why it takes people a little bit to get into it, but it's a great movie. It's a great movie. So enough of that. Anyway, thanks for being with me this far. And look, I'm caught up. I'm very excited, and I'll even get this out before the next Wednesday, and a new stack of books. So in the meantime, thanks. The world is even more of a dumpster fire than it was last week when I said, "Oh, the world's kind of," so what we have to turn to is our communities, our smaller communities. I think to gain strength from your friends and from your fellow comic book readers. And thank you for sharing, letting me share a little of my opinion with you. So, all I can say is until we meet again, use your powers for good. And Lord knows we need it. So, thanks. For good.